How about a kinder, gentler regime change? Saurabh Sharma is here from American Moment. I'm James Poulos. Welcome to 0 Hour. Saurabh Sharma is the president and the co-founder of American Moment. He co-hosts the podcast Moment of Truth and serves as the executive director of the Edmund Burke Foundation. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we love it. Welcome, Saurabh.
It's my pleasure to be here.
How are you?
Fantastic. The world's falling apart.
Are you bugging?
I don't know what that means. Is that a boomer reference?
It means you're freaking out, like low-key freaking out.
Yeah.
For real.
More like high-key freaking out all the time.
High-key, yeah. Okay. Well, so let's get into it. You are building a new government in the bureaucracy from the bottom up, for those who are not aware. However, it's not your government to play with right now. Do you think that Donald Trump is going to give you the government you need in order to flow all of these young bureaucrats into office?
I think President Trump has learned his lesson on personnel in a big way. If you look at the single best example of how he's thinking about personnel this time around, go look at his campaign. It's staffed with some of the most competent people you will find in the entire MAGA world, all the way from Susie Wiles down to junior staffers.
That was my first question, is can you give examples? Because a lot of people are sort of traumatized from how the first term played out. And it is tough to do when you can't fire your own civil servants, your own executive branch. But who's at the top of the pack for you coming into the new administration if it happens?
Yeah, I mean, that comparison point is so important, right? Because people say, well, first time around the campaign was a mess and the administration was a mess. And so if you're trying to project into the future, then we should look at how the campaign is going right now, and it's order of magnitude more competently run, maybe 2 orders of magnitude more competently run than any Trump entity in politics for the last decade. And then I think that with all the preparation work that we're doing and a bunch of other groups, we're certainly not even the largest among them, that it's going to be a very different administration. There's going to be political constraints, obviously. I think people sometimes have a little bit of fantasy land about what the Senate's going to look like, even if you have 53, 54 votes in the Senate. You know, are Larry Hogan, Todd Young, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski going to let President Trump nominate and confirm whoever he wants to Secretary of State? Maybe not, and so it's going to still be complicated. In politics, there are no sure things, there are no easy things, and nothing worth doing happens quietly and quickly. But I do think that there is a real opportunity, and the opportunity that I see is this. President Trump has 4 years where he puts significant damage on the board against our enemies and the forces allied against us, and it sets the stage for the next administration, ideally continuous with that one, for 8 more years where really transformative things can be done. And that's really how long it takes. You look at successful center-right parties across the world, it takes them basically a decade to do anything really useful in the long term. And that's what the goal should be, is spend these first few years doing things that make it more feasible for the right to gain and utilize long-term political power, get that political power, and then hopefully do some things to fix the country.
All right, it's a pretty good answer. It's an excellent non-answer. Is Trump coming back? Yes or no?
I think that it's 50-50 chance. Just this morning I was looking at swing state polling, and it showed Trump up 10 plus points in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And then it showed him up like 2 or 3 points in Wisconsin and Michigan, and down a point in Pennsylvania, or something like that. And I get real nervous when I see polls like that. When a poll comes out that shows Trump up 10 points in Minnesota. None of that makes sense to me, and the reason why is it's a highly divided country. Both political parties are actually pretty good at making elections competitive. Some are better at putting multiple wins on the board in competitive elections. I think Democrats are better at it, but anyone who thinks that this is going to be some blowout in either direction, I think is smoking the good stuff, and I'd like to borrow some because I'm a lot more nervous than that. It's going to be a highly contested election up until the very last moment for a variety of reasons. Some for boring like political infrastructure reasons, which is that the Dems have better turnout machines and things like that, but also just for basic structural electoral reasons, which is that, in the 6 or 7 states that matter, there are razor-thin majorities for either party, and depending on the weather that day, they may flip one way or another. So, I've been hovering vaguely between like a 47 to 52% chance that he's going to win for the last 18 months, and I'm still there. I'm not entirely sure.
That's not a place of peace, those
No.
percentages. But it sounds like you're not worried about fortification or whatever you want to call efforts to ensure by any, surely by any legal means necessary, that Donald Trump does not make it back.
I have a friend from Silicon Valley. He lives in Austin now, and he told me something very soon after the 2020 election that really has been my sort of source of peace and strength for a long time. Voter fraud or fortification, however you'd like to frame it, is for the Democrats what the Electoral College is for Republicans. It's just something you have to price in. The Democrats are constantly gnashing and wailing about how the Electoral College gives us a structural advantage, and they're right about that. And rampant voter fraud gives them a structural advantage, and so we just have to win more and win better. But I think that they're certainly going to try. But look, COVID's over and people are paying closer attention. There's been a lot of good work done on the election integrity issue over the last couple of years. And so most states have stronger elections than they did before. Unfortunately, blue states or states that have very blue government still have some issues. But I think people are going to be a lot more vigilant. And there's just going to be a lot less they're going to be able to get away with. Does that mean it's going to be perfect? No. Does that mean if we lose, it's going to be impossible to attribute that kind of stuff to why we lost? Not at all. But I'm not confident that if we lose, it will have been because of the fortification.
Okay, so maybe not a squeaky clean process, but probably better than last time.
Yes.
Okay, well that's good. I mean, there's some say that that actually things are going so poorly for the administration that there's an incentive to get Trump back in. We ruined it. Here you go. Have a nice 4 years.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I'm very worried about. It's not an original idea. Other people have written about it, but I'm basically convinced that they're going to destroy the bond market if Trump takes back office.
Okay, how's that play out?
Well, I just think, we've been printing funny money like it's nobody's business for the last really 30 years, but especially in the last decade. And someone has to own the political consequences of the austerity required to fix that. And I think the powers that be would much rather that be Republicans than it be Democrats.
Yeah.
And so if President Trump takes office, he's got transformative things he wants to do in a whole variety of issues. Golly gee, wouldn't it be great to derail him if he suddenly has to worry about some sort of fiscal crisis instead? And so I think the administration should be prepared for that. They should be watching out for it. Luckily, he's got fantastic people like Bob Lighthizer advising him that I think would find creative things to do in a moment of crisis. But it's going to be dicey. I don't think that, at this point, the economy is held together with like duct tape and Band-Aids. Yeah. And it's, it's like Joe Biden itself. In classical times, the nation and its ruler were kind of synecdoches for each other. And I think right now, whatever unicorn blood and Adderall they've got Joe Biden on, in many ways, that's the American economy. They're just shoving stimulus and happy, clappy, good vibes into it and hoping that it sticks together.
It's the American dream. 2024. Juice me, daddy.
Yeah, and there's a lot of juicing going on. And I think as soon as it is no longer politically expedient to keep things on the rails just a little bit longer, whether it's the Fed, bond markets, or any other major institution, they're going to, take a second look and realize that King dollar might not be as strong as it once was. I don't think the U.S. dollar is going away as a reserve currency or anything. I think a lot of that is cope. But I do think that there will be major price to pay. The regime will find a way to extract, its punishment on the American people for daring to vote for a Republican anyway. And I think this is one of the many manifestations it's going to take.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that it's just too much of a pain in the ass to get off the dollar. There's so much else going wrong in so many places at once. People are scrambling to figure out how to reestablish their own sovereignty in a digital age. Why waste your precious time trying to cobble together some dollar alternative? Although, it's sort of Asia markets. They're slow walking it, and it's a factor. But I think you're right about the dollar. I've got friends in Silicon Valley too, who among us at this point? And the word on the street over there seems to be that between sort of East Coast business finance guys and West Coast tech guys, like there really is the beginnings of what looks like a sort of quiet stampede in Trump's direction. Are you seeing this? Do you think it's real?
Yeah, quiet stampede is basically right, I think. There's a lot of different currents here that I think will play out over the next few months. The most boring and fake version of this would be some sort of mass public consensus in Silicon Valley around an RFK candidacy or something like that. There's a reporter at Puck News, Teddy Schleifer, who has basically been predicting this, that the Bill Ackmans of the world, they're going to look at the choices in front of them, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and the last vestiges of orange man bad pathology will take over, and they'll say, all right, we're going with the independent choice.
Yeah, I don't know if that computes. I mean, Teddy doesn't have many friends in Silicon Valley. But Trump is more in the zone on Israel, I would say, than RFK from the standpoint of a guy like Bill Ackman, right?
Maybe. I mean, the funny thing is that I think RFK Jr. has had a much more uncomplicatedly pro-Israel stance than even President Trump has. Like those right-wing journalists from Israel came and interviewed him at Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago, and everyone freaked out because he was like, "You gotta wrap this war up. It's bad PR, basically." The president has always been very.
That's what he says to everyone.
He does, but apparently you're not allowed to say that in that domain, and so I think he's sensitive to the fact that Israel is on the verge of becoming a pariah state on the international stage. And that's not to put any moral valence on how they're prosecuting this war. It's just the reality, which is that it's becoming less and less popular across the world to have a strong diplomatic relationship with Israel. And so, with these Silicon Valley guys, the question is always, will they stop being afraid of their own shadow? And I remember talking to one of the EAC guys a few months ago, and they were making noises about this bespoke ideology they've created, and I just said, hold on, look, it feels like every 6 months for the last 20 years you guys have tried to create a new bespoke ideology that allows you to be right-wing without calling it being right-wing, and even more just basically you just really don't want to be a Republican, but you want all the benefits of like having Republicans in charge of things.
Many such
It's
cases.
time to suck it up. Like, I'm sorry, you just have to be a Republican. Like, if you don't want your entire like fortune taxed away, and you want to live in a relatively peaceful and not chaotic world where there aren't tens of millions of people crossing the border on a daily basis, you might just have to be a Republican. And a couple people are starting to understand that. But
yeah, a small price to pay.
A small price to pay. I know they're annoying and bad, and like no one hates Republicans more than I do. Don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, the one thing that you guys are highly unlikely to innovate yourself out of is human nature. Yeah. And
not for lack of trying.
Not for lack of trying. And that's why I think the RFK Jr. candidacy is going to be so tempting for them, because they're going to think, aha, I found my hack. I will not be part of the two-party system. There's an independent candidate that he's on podcasts that I listen to, and I'm going to support him. So I do think there's going to be at least some attrition to that. But
well, that's sort of the nightmare scenario, is like the podcast vote.
Yeah.
That's, whatever party that is, I don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, Andrew Yang ran for mayor and it didn't work.
If you like what we do around here and you want a great way to let other people know what you're watching and listening to, you're going to love all the Blaze Media merchandise available now at shopblazemedia.com. Everything from the Blaze Heritage and Blaze Media collections: jackets, t-shirts, hoodies, socks, mugs, candles, flags, and a whole lot more. There's so much there you're going to love. Go to shopblazemedia.com today. Check out all the cool stuff available from Blaze Media, and be sure you use the code BLAZE10 to get 10% off your entire order. That's shopblazemedia.com. Promo code BLAZE10 for 10% off. Do it today.
You're bugging. I think we established that. You're high-key freaking out. I don't want to totally get eaten by the Israel discourse here, but I do. I mean, I think it is, I think it's important to say, like, look, even if the way this war is being fought is like not ideal, right? That alone is not enough to create a pariah state. I mean, the U.S. has done all kinds of horrible things in wars. Wars are horrible things, and most of them are fought dirty, and most of them kill lots of civilians, and that's terrible. But Israel's problems, I mean, the attempt to kind of make Hamas into something that was kind of controllable, that didn't work. There have been a lot of bad geostrategic bets placed by countries in the West, I think, over the past 20 years. And, you go back to the early 2000s and it was all sort of like, well, it's like New Labor rules the world. It's Tony Blair, it's Bill Clinton, it's all of their cronies, it's all their NGOs. Israel kind of got wrapped up in that for various reasons. But it all really isn't panning out very well, is it?
Yeah, I think that the thing that the Middle East is going to decide on in the next few years is, who's going to win history, basically. I mean, pro-civilizational forces or anti-civilizational forces.
I don't know if you can win history.
I know, it's like I'm probably getting, all my Straussian friends are probably,
I think you have
snipers
to
out.
travel back in time to kill baby Hitler in order to win history.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so I guess what I mean in a different way is that so much of the problems in that part of the world, I think, are, there were never any winners. Like everything got kind of frozen in amber sometime in the 20th century. And, if I had to place a bet in a fair fight, I'd put it on Israel against its enemies any time. I mean, they desalinate their water. Like that's a big deal. Like that's a pretty civilizationally intensive thing to do. And they built a, pretty thriving country in the middle of the desert. I, as much as a foreign policy realist that I am, and I'm definitely skeptical of whatever latest thing the neocons are losing their mind about on any given week. My loyalties ultimately rest with pro-civilizational forces, which is why, like, when I see the Palestine enjoyers on campus, like, there's no part of me that's like, those are our friends on the right. Like, it doesn't compute. It never will.
Yeah, well, and not just Palestine enjoyers, but Hamas enjoyers.
Right.
I mean, how far can you take it?
Yeah.
We're about to find out how far they're willing to go.
Yeah.
But it's pretty far. I mean, and then you look at Europe. This is my pivot. This is my pivot to the national conservatism discourse.
Yeah.
You are all up in that business. You got the NatCon conferences. You got the Edmund Burke Foundation. This project, sort of Yoram Hazony's project, for those who are not in the know. I know they're out there. It's not just a fishbowl that we live in 24 hours a day. Is, and correct me if I'm exaggerating, is conservatism is doomed unless it's a sort of super friends of conservative nations, and that you really have to lead with the nation or else you can kiss conservatism goodbye. Is that right?
Yeah, more or less. And it's really by competition or by comparison. So much of where the left has drawn prestige, influence, and strategic counsel over the last few decades has been through this internationalist project, right? And prestige is, I think, maybe the most important part of it, because your average sort of lib functionary in any given nation would not feel satisfied by their political activity unless it involved twice a year a trip to a fancy conference in Europe or in South America or in Africa, if they didn't feel like they were part of something larger than themselves. And we can impugn that and we can say that's really dumb and you shouldn't have that. But at the end of the day, people are looking for sources of meaning beyond themselves. They want to feel like they're part of grand, large projects. And so historically, with the exception of a couple factions, the right, institutionally, center-right parties across the world did not engage in that kind of collaboration. And so it meant that the already weak prestige value of right-wing parties was even weaker than it could be, because there was no sort of constellation of my friends in Spain and Budapest and India that you can lean on as part of that self-actualization. And then on top of that, and this is maybe slightly less applicable to the United States, though not entirely, the collaboration that comes out of it was less available to those right-wing parties as well. So whether it's in terms of political tactics, like how do you actually build durable center-right supermajorities in countries that give you that 10-year time horizon to do useful things, or specific policies, take Hungary's stuff that it's doing on fertility, or how Israel secures its border, or any other example. all the way to learning how the other side operates. The global totalitarian angiocracy of the left has a very straightforward playbook, and it tends to run it in a very similar way in every country that it shows up. And so if, the Hungarian friends can let the Indian friends know, hey, this is what they're going to do. They're going to open these, State Department funded media outlets that are going to be, pro-democracy, and this is how they're going to try to do a color revolution in your big cities. Here's how you can prepare for it in a, healthy way and prophylactically stop the problem before it becomes one. All of that is, valuable real estate for the right to continue to grow in over the next few decades.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of that, I don't think. But I'm still going to press you on it because that's good TV. But also, I mean, look, my friends and colleagues at the Claremont Institute, all nations are not created equal. Some nations are different than others. And America just isn't just another country in the way that even our closest allies are. So there's that issue. But what really keeps me up at night, at least figuratively speaking, is, what I've seen is this strange kind of phenomenon where people get locked into this kind of Star Wars idea of like, we are the rebel alliance, we are always the ones on the outs, we are the dissidents, we are, we can't accomplish anything ourselves, we always need allies, we've got to get the team together, and in spite of our differences, surely we can come together around this basket of principles that are just abstract enough so that no one really, you just kind of like, don't talk about the awkward things, don't talk about the, in some ways it almost feels like, the campus that people on the right are supposedly trying to avoid, where you just kind of get everyone together and you celebrate diversity and everything's going to be okay. And what ends up happening, and there are understandable reasons why all this stuff goes on. So I'm not, I'm cognizant of that, but it doesn't get enough attention. We've seen this pattern where what defines the litmus test of are you one of us is not do you put America first, is not do you put the interests of the American people first, but rather do you stand up and publicly associate yourself as strongly as possible with our allies, with our closest allies. And it's like, I get it, but take a look at the UK, our close ally with whom we have a special relationship, with whom our national security state is totally intertwined. GCHQ and NSA, basically one organization. This is unconstitutional. Nobody cares. I care. Maybe you care. Nobody cares. This is a country, Brexit speed bump. They are hurtling toward, whether you want to call it Orwellianism or Cromwellianism, whatever it is, it's a form of government that is not just mismanaged, that is not just, they're sort of just taking things a little too far. It is still fundamentally different from America's form of government. Parliament notwithstanding, constitutional, they're not constitutional, but it's sort of semi figurehead monarchy notwithstanding. And you can run that same sort of analysis with Israel, with Hungary. They just signed, just upgraded their partnership status to like gold, platinum, or whatever it is with China. And there are reasons for this, but it can't be the case that the right in America is controlled and dominated by a discourse where whether or not you are a good guy is primarily determined by whether or not you speak as highly as possible of our allies instead of focusing on Americans and America first.
For sure.
Am I wrong?
No, not at all. And
end of interview. Just kidding. No, go ahead.
Well, look, what national conservatism is not is the idea that we should be fetishizing this set of countries that we will arbitrarily declare as national conservative countries. That's not it at all. There are a set of substantive commitments that undergird it on policy and on ideology, and there has been tens of millions of words bled on paper about why, Section 8B of the Statement of Principles is, not perfectly consonant with the Declaration of Independence. Putting that aside, what value the right has from international cooperation is value in numbers. The standing athwart history yelling stop thing, which was the central tactical posture of the right for the last 60 years, cannot continue. And so recognizing that we have, in some ways, the hardest fight ahead of us in the United States, because it is the biggest apple on the table, and the regime is going to fight very hard to keep every last inch of control in this country for as long as it can. There are green shoots in other places that we can look to for both what victory might look like and what the opportunities are. In the same way that we are very comfortable on the right of center saying that states are the laboratories of democracy, why can't other countries be laboratories of democracy too, in terms of the kinds of things that we might want to do if we actually get power in the United States? There is a lot to learn. My ideological priors might make me more sympathetic to the idea that America could yet still have things to learn from other countries. That might be the, conversation about an exceptional nation that we could spend 12 hours philosophizing about.
Well, what's an example? What do we need to learn? Who do we need to learn from?
Walls work. I don't know. There's a bunch of countries.
Walls work.
There's a lot of countries that built walls, and it seems to have done well. I mean, it's always very interesting. Like even very conventional political forces. The Wall Street Journal Ed Board, even though they'll kvetch about the American rights fetishization of so-and-so regime, they love to talk about, what we really like is a points-based immigration system. It's like, well, where'd you get that term from? Well, Canada has that, and Australia has that, and New Zealand has that, and a couple other countries have that. It's like, ultimately the valence, the political valence, or the stink that the media puts on what forms of international collaboration and inspiration are okay is completely arbitrary.
Well, I mean, talk about arbitrary. You're right to raise the question of what does victory look like?
Yeah.
But there's another question which is what is the right actually?
Yeah.
Who is it that's doing the winning? Do you have like a working definition of what the right is internationally in 2024?
The operative coalition for the right in any country that matters is the forces that stand for some form of social traditionalism, some form of national identity that is distinct from global citizenship, rule of law, and survival. I mean, it's kind of a glib answer, but at the end of the day, like an attention to fertility and demographics, and even immigration adjacent to that, is a question of whether or not a nation will endure at all. And over again, the right versus left dichotomy in every country of note that you look at is on those terms. We believe in family, a basic level of freedom afforded to our people, and the endurance of certain religious and traditional principles that are important to this people in this place. And the other side is just like, we want to atomize you and turn you into an acid bath soup that we stir around until there's nothing distinctive
people say,
left.
Yes, like how do I vote for that?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're so right, then why are we losing is a question that a lot of people are asking.
The zeitgeist of a lot of right-wing parties across the world for the last several decades has been basically anti-political. Like politics has been a dirty thing to do in those countries in sort of two ways. Either the right in a given country is sort of politically distinctive from the left, and it's really bad at politics and political tactics such that it loses, or the right in a given country, the Tories in the UK are a good example of this, is so ideologically close to the left that it doesn't matter. It's just like there was a great tweet that I saw the other day, where it was from like one of these young ingenue British right-wing commentators that's supposed to be the future, and it was like things the conservative government must do now, and one of them was ensure trans rights, and it's like, okay, great, awesome.
Wow.
Like we're
good.
Yeah,
okay.
So
yeah, I don't know. I mean, you look at Germany for instance, and in some ways, like not a great example that you can draw vast generalizations from. But on the other hand, look at very very important part of Europe, and in some ways like the stick that's holding it all up. You've got alternative for Deutschland, for Germany. They're not afraid of being political. And now you have this crisis in Germany where it's like, oh, the right is being political. We need to ban this to preserve our sacred democracy. Meanwhile, there are protests in Germany where certain folks are assembling and saying we need a caliphate and we need it in Germany, and there's this kind of like pained like, oh well, surely there's some way that you can set up a caliphate as like a private sector organization. Like this is a real discussion, right? So like, you look at the European project, and this is an anti-political project. This is like no, we do not want people sort of forming groups and wrestling for power. We're just going to have the rules-based international order eat everything. But a lot of people actually want that. They actually want to be absorbed into the blob. Can you can't reason someone out of that. How do you get someone to think different about that?
Look, at the end of the day, my sort of theory of democratic polities is that, at the moment they form, there's a broad enough level of civic participation in that moment of genesis that you can have real political contestation. But basically, 10 to 20 years after that, most people become quite depoliticized, and they ultimately will choose ease and comfort over disruption and upheaval every single time, until things get bad enough again that something like a political revolution, either explicit or implicit, is required to rewrite the rules of the game. That might be what's going on in Ireland right now. I mean, you've got the equivalent of, hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets every single day against their mass migration policies. Germany is having, there's so much in the German political bloodstream that says, we are just never allowed to be right-wing again, for, good reasons. But still, AfD is winning elections and gaining market share. The most interesting example of, the overlap of a country that both matters and is going in this direction is France. I mean, Marine Le Pen is doing quite well in these polls.
The Le Pens always seem to be doing just well enough to create news cycles, but never better than that. Is it different this time?
It might be. I mean, look, their elections aren't for a couple of years, but at the end of the day, you can only look at the situation as it exists right now. Will they probably attenuate in the polls some, and will there be a sine wave? And the eternal cycle of it's so over and we're so back will happen there as it does everywhere else. But I think that Europe is basically going to have one of two things happen to it over the course of the next few decades. It will either gain the political will to undo the worst excesses of the migration experiment, which are still in progress. Over 40% of the foreign-born population in the UK was brought in the last 10 years. Or they'll say, it's fine, we're just going to lose our country and countries. And there'll be real political upheaval because it's not sustainable. The strong forces from the old world cannot, will just steamroll, polite bureaucrats in any given country. And so,
and there, I've been to Hungary myself. Some of the chatter out there is quite pessimistic. They don't really want to talk about that as publicly as they want to talk about. But the issue is, aren't they going to get steamrolled? There are people in Budapest who are like, it's all demographic. The youth is totally not, the dogs are not eating the dog food. In 5 years, it's going to be Los Angeles.
No, I think Hungary, at least in the short term, politically, is going to be fine because their right-wing party has done a lot to ensure that it remains popular. The question is, does the EU decide, no, you actually got out on the good side of the greatest natural experiment that Europe has faced in the last 1,000 years, which is you said no to migrants and the rest of us said yes, and we're actually not going to let you have the benefits of that. Here, come have some migrants. And that's the proposal that is passing through the European Union right now is hey, you have to pay us 30,000 euros per every migrant we don't send to you, or something crazy like that. It might be 6, I don't know. But that's the question is will they be allowed to reap the benefits of their own good public policy choices? I don't know. And that's why I think, people get very upset when they see things like, the deal they're making with China or other countries. I don't blame them for trying to de-risk their geopolitical alliances as much as humanly possible because they might need friends in the next few years. And it's certainly not going to be the Biden administration coming to their side when it comes time to say no to migrants.
Well, I mean, whether it's this or other stuff geopolitically, I mean, how much of what we're talking about is just going to be determined by the events of the next year or so, sort of militarily? We got a couple of wars going.
Yeah.
They're going to end one way or the other. And are we going to be living in a different world regardless of what we think?
Maybe. I mean, I really don't see any path to this Ukraine war ending that is any different than what it will be, which is, either go for a year or 3 or 5, and at the end of it, you'll have basically the same result. Ukraine will be a demographically dead, bombed out shell of a country. There'll be a bunch of private equity guys from around the world that will lick their chops and, get in on the reconstruction grift. It'll never be
just like
really
they did
fully
to
created.
Russia, just about.
Yeah. They'll sell off a lot of public lands and stuff. That's already starting to happen. And then they'll look and they'll say, oh, we have a demographic problem. We don't have enough young workers. And so they'll import a bunch of second and third world migrants. And will Ukraine really be all that Ukrainian? Meanwhile, the parts of the country that Russia really wanted, it'll get. And that'll be that. What's going to happen in Israel? I mean, there's more of a risk of black swan events there. Iran decides to lob something over the fence. That you never know what's going to happen there. I'm definitely occasionally in the nothing happens gang when it comes to this sort of thing. I don't think that there's going to be that, specific black swan moment that's going to be like the whole world has changed forever. Palestinians and the Israelis have been shooting at each other for the better part of 75 years, and I think that's going to continue.
The system is working as designed, as they say.
Yeah. I think the most interesting things that can happen in the next 10 years are in technology. If there's a breakthrough on, what people call AI or some sort of energy source or in some natural resource area, that's actually what's going to cause quantum changes in the way that the world operates and lives.
Are you tired of living in a blue city or state? Do you want to get away from crime and people hostile to your way of life? Is it even still possible to live in the America of your childhood? Well, I want to tell you about a company called Ridge Runner. Ridge Runner is building new communities in historic America. You no longer have to settle for living in a place where everything you love is being destroyed by those who hate you. With Ridge Runner, you can once again live where the things you love are cherished. Ridge Runner picks pristine land in rural Kentucky with top-notch natural beauty, value, and location. Move to a Ridge Runner community and be surrounded by patriotic, ambitious Americans that have chosen to live in a setting where their children can run free, their doors don't need to be locked, and natural beauty is abundant. If you have that pioneer spirit and are ready to join Appalachia's rising future as you build yours, schedule a call today to learn more about Ridge Runner properties. Whether you work from home, you love to hunt and fish, you finally want to build that homestead you've always dreamed of, or simply just to be in a community where your way of life is prized, Ridge Runner is ready to help you find the ideal property. With small acre lots starting at just $35,000 to large 100-acre holler lot farms, well priced under $400,000, Ridge Runner has options for anyone seeking a life piloted on the old ways in Kentucky. Visit www.ridgerunnerusa.com today.
I want to talk about this demographic thing too, because this is interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
There are many kind of weird claims being thrown around about the population bomb, the population bust. This has been going on for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But the discourse right now that like declining populations are inherently bad, I find that to be sort of mysterious in some ways.
Yeah, so do I.
Because, we know that automatically increasing your population does not automatically leave you better off.
Sure.
We already know that. So there's this kind of, the counterfactual is, okay, well, if my population is decreasing at the margins, whether it's due to deportation or just generational imbalance or whatever, not necessarily a bad thing. If you have an enormous welfare state, that puts extra pressure on you. But then perhaps your welfare state collapses and you end up better off. So it's more complicated than it seems. And I'm just wondering, you got Elon Musk out there saying, no, we need lots of people. And certainly from like an egotistical standpoint, you're like, well, I'm pretty good. So if there were 10 more of me, and if my friends there are 10 more of them, then surely we'd all be better off. It's easy to think that way. But there's this unchallenged premise that, gosh, isn't there a scenario where our population actually goes down? There's more for everyone, and we just prevent vast tides of not barbarians anymore. We don't really have those like we did a long time ago, but we do have just kind of seas of people sloshing around, and it never seems to work out very well for the recipients.
Yeah, it is. It's a very good point that you're making, and I think it's criminally under-discussed on a couple different levels. One, I think what's about to happen here over the next decade is that the desire for more people is going to become an elite obsession and become further and further divorced from where most people actually are. If you go on the street, and you walk around with 4 small humans that look like your children, people are going to still look at you weird. Like, there is a deeply ingrained bias in Western societies against large families for a variety of reasons. It's, seen as déclassé, it's sort of poverty coded in some ways, but also it's
not a lot of
ideological.
freedom and self-actualization taking place in a large family.
Right. And then also, like, people have the climate cult they're obsessed with. And so I wouldn't be surprised if both Democrats and Republicans at the elite level over the course of the next decade, decide that this is a major existential crisis for the nation, but the vast swath of, like, voters in the country are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of like casting my eye about the scene, it seems to me like the trajectory that we're on is larger families and fewer of them.
Right.
And that seems to be like the hell scenario for like the for the blob people.
Right. There was some essay about how these protests on college campuses are forging a new Jewish identity in opposition to Zionism. And someone had quote tweeted it. They said, actually, like, your scribbles in publications that no one reads will have a lot less to do with the future of Jewish identity than birth rates in Orthodox Jewish families do.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that Hollywood and Las Vegas were the birth of a new Jewish identity that had nothing to do with Zionism.
But, like, realistically, like, that's true. So a couple things on the population issue. One, I do think it is sort of axiomatically puzzling when people are just like, we just need constantly more people at all times. It just doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to me that there probably is something like a natural equilibrium for how many human beings like having in like 1 square mile. Like,
especially when they're like busily dehumanizing everyone they can get their hands on.
Right. And so I wouldn't even be surprised, and this is like a conspiracy theory of mine, if there's almost like some sort of epigenetic function where human beings, when they live in extremely dense population centers, naturally have a desire and maybe even a biological tendency to reproduce less.
Yeah.
Because, historically it would make sense, because that would mean resources are likely to be scarce.
Zoochosis is real. You must look up zoochosis and study it, and you will see that it's not just animals who are affected by this.
Right. And so you take that, you play that out in the other direction. So much of, especially American fertility, I think, was driven over the last few centuries by the constant colonization of the frontier. If you and your family under the Homestead Act got, 30 acres in the middle of nowhere, you want to have a bunch of kids to like populate that out.
And then you need more kids so that you can have the kids raise the kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
it's a flywheel.
Exactly. But we've largely closed the frontier. The majority of the land west of the Mississippi is owned by the federal government. They don't want anyone living on it. And
how much of that is land that you, for instance, would want to live on?
Oh, a lot of it. There's some good stuff out there. There's a lot of. We could still have more national parks than any other country in the world. All of the most beautiful terrain ever, completely protected, and still open up vast swaths of very, very good land.
Yeah, because there's like a fun scenario where it's like Zillow, but for homesteading. But there's also like a nightmare scenario where it's like you're just turning America's grandeur into like a reality show of people just like trying to grab their piece.
Sure. Like, I'm not trying to turn, beautiful rolling hills into suburbs. Like, that's not what we're looking to do. But, the opening of a frontier, I think, is probably one of the most valuable things you can do to actually inspire fertility in the population, because it's, human beings' natural desire is to conquer, an untamed land.
How do we do that? How do you personally, Saurabh, get the government to reopen the frontier?
You have to get the climate cultists out of the government. And you have to, I think there'll be natural political pressure for this anyway over the next few years, because
as cities collapse and people look to the horizon and see those like clouds of smoke billowing that you see in like disaster movies. Yeah.
Right. I mean, in your typical urban environment, it's impossible to build housing because you have the competing interests of the incumbents that own the housing, historic preservation boards, and the environmentalists, and they all, scream at you and don't let you build anything. You got into the country, you still have to deal with the environmentalists, but those other two forces are a lot less operative. And on the other side, the pressures of working remotely have decreased significantly. Elon Musk's Starlink is going to make the entire country on the web.
There will be literally no escape from the internet, no matter what you do. Awesome, very productive.
Yeah, a separate discussion of whether that's good or bad, but point being is that if you've got an email job, you can do your email job from wherever you want. But honestly, to me, the real surface area for that kind of frontier to open up again isn't on this eye level. It's like basically two options. Either we can go into the vast blue ocean, or we can go up. And, I think that a cultural zeitgeist that the United States needs to be a spacefaring civilization again is the closest thing that we can get in this life to something that will save us.
Sounds like somebody who's been watching reruns of SeaQuest 2020.
I don't know what that is. Is that
you
keep dropping boomer references, and I'm just not aware.
Get out of my office. Go watch SeaQuest and get back to me.
Yeah.
You will appreciate it.
And then, as a final thing, part of the reason why this fertility crisis is going to be a problem from a public policy perspective for a lot of countries is because we have this simultaneous overlap of technology that has increased the length of lives while simultaneously not making the last 20 years of those lives very good, and a population decline at the same time. So the one thing that's not getting automated at any time is like the nurse for your, schizophrenic grandpa. Like, that's not going anywhere. And so
the mobile suicide pod will just close around your schizophrenic grandpa.
Which, like, that's one of the dark things. I think that in terms of like the quote unquote market forces, like, this is why you just have to decide you're not going to allow this stuff, because there are so many cross pressures in Western countries that will make assisted suicide very, very, very tempting as a public policy solution. And that's really dark. We should not let it be like
assisted plus.
Yeah. We should not let that be a tool that leaders use to get out of other tough.
It'll be like organ donation. You just be like, get your license, you get your little sticker, like, I'm giving my body to the food supply.
Yeah, they'll let me off that. They can off me the second I turn 85.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is the food supply is so poisoned that no one's going to want to eat their fellow human beings, because they'll know that the body is just like a concentration of like diseased chemicals. We got a few minutes left. Look, American optimism. Like, I like feeling like we're not doomed for a variety of reasons. But like, don't we just have to admit that at this point America has like a particularly bad hand to play?
Not at all. Every single time there's a doomer narrative, America comes out, on top. Just take like one minor example. It's like there's a resource that's really important to global life. X country that's a geopolitical foe of the United States has a monopoly on this resource. De-dollarization and a multipolar world is coming. Some rancher in Minnesota finds the world's largest supply of said resource they have ever found. And the cycle repeats itself.
I guess. I mean, are there cobalt deposits hiding under the Rockies that we don't know about?
I'd be willing to bet good money that there's cobalt somewhere under this great nation.
Because I'm planning on homesteading with 10,000 acres in the Rocky Mountains, and if the cobalt deposits are under there, I don't know, dude.
Yeah, there'll be something. There'll be something underneath your land that you'll be able to sell and make
I don't know.
$1 gajillion.
I'm talking about, we're like 25 years plus, depending on how you're counting, of like mistaken judgments, bad bets, big swings that didn't pay off, neolibs, neocons, just the whole sort of like strategic model of how America or the West or the Anglosphere or fill in the blank with your like, you know, foreign affairs cover essay over the past 25 years buzzword, soft power. I mean, the only thing these people have really been able to do effectively is reduce their own local populations to like a new kind of servitude. So like all those follies, all of those mistakes, and you know, you can chalk some of this up to malevolence, but I really think it's just like, you know, you get this generation it's raised in college and we can do it and we're gonna use policy to change the world. And they tried. They played that, they ran those plays, and we're living with the consequences, and the consequences really suck. And so the bill is due, right?
Here's the cause for optimism. The boomers are, in fact, going away.
Wow,
it's going to be...
That's, if I'm a boomer, that's not, I don't know, maybe some of them are ready for the suicide bill.
Yeah,
I hope not.
Look, whether it's through peaceful retirement or spontaneously fossilizing on the Senate floor, Mitch McConnell will leave the Senate. So much of the sclerosis in American life and these errors are because there was a generational changing of the hands that never happened, because the boomers just held on to power long past their prime, held on to resources long past their prime, and they just kept running the same script. And the only people they would elevate is people that were basically facsimile skin suits of all the things they believe. But their power is coming to an end through natural means. It should have happened a long time ago, but it hasn't. And
this is why they grew Sam Altman in a lab to ensure that they could live forever.
That's right, to make sure that their worldview was propagated. But at the end of the day, you know, you actually poll Gen X on down on important issues in American life, and they are completely dissatisfied with the political consensus that the boomers created. Now, is there going to be growing pains because, you know, the boomer administrators have built the system purely for their own use, and like we're going to come in and be like, what's a floppy disk? Yeah, there's going to be some of that. But at the end of the day, I think that there's enough natural benefits that the United States has, whether it's the fact that it actually does have, comparable to the rest of the world, an extraordinarily virtuous, intelligent, ambitious people who are also a little violent, but that's okay. It has all the natural resources you could ever want, you know, defensible oceans on either side of it, relatively peaceful neighbors. We're going to be fine. I think that there's two false paths. You know, boomerism is the idea that, you know, 1776, moral arc of the universe is long, it bends towards justice, everything's going to be fine. You know, and then doomerism, which is like, all is lost, may as well sit on a beach, sip a pina colada, and wait for the end times to come. Like, I think practically speaking, what the moment we find ourselves in is we have 10 to 20 years when, as that generational changing of the guard happens, to decide whether or not we're going to be a serious country. Can the successors to the boomers actually, you know, grab hold of this state and society and say, we're going to actually have ambitions beyond the base and pecuniary, like, you know, fake ethnopolitics that's been dominating American life? And are we going to be a great nation? And it's entirely possible that people will decide no, that it's much more convenient to just, like, you know, throw rocks at each other all day, every day. But if serious people manage to take the reins and operate even slightly competently, sky is still the limit for the American experiment.
Well, I'm tempted to agree with you. You know, I don't think we're doomed, but I do think you know, the idol of greatness can be worshipped a little bit too hard, and if we lose track of humility and spiritual strength, all those good words are just they're not gonna serve us. Slipping into Donald Trump language, the most beautiful words, they're not enough. But these words have been quite satisfying. So come back and we'll get into some even more frightening and edgy topics. Saurabh Sharma, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So that's it for now. If you want to become a Blaze TV subscriber in the meantime and help us create more content just like this, go to blazetv.com. Use the code 0hour20. You'll get $20 off your first year of Blaze TV. Who doesn't want that? This has been 0 Hour. I am James Poulos, and may God have mercy on us all.